Welcome to Bat Therapy, mental health through the lens of comics and film. Be a fly on the wall or a bat in the cave, listening in on a friendship built out of a love for talking Batman, comics, and the everyday struggle to achieve mental health and happiness.
We're your hosts, clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown and educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Don't forget to follow us on YouTube and social media and find our Patreon at patreon.com/battherapy.
This podcast is about providing education and understanding and is not a replacement for mental health treatment or support. If you're needing help, go to bat-therapy.com for resources. Okay, so this week is really exciting. We're actually going to have a friend of mine that is a guest with us today, Carolyn Cohagan. So real quick, I just want to do an introduction for Carolyn so you guys know who she is. So she is a stand-up comedian turned writer. She has published 5 novels and 2 activity books for children, including her book, The Lost Children, that became part of the Scholastic Book Club in 2011. Also, her Time Zero young adult trilogy won over 10 literary honors. Carolyn is also the founder of Kids with Pens, which is a really cool Austin-based creative writing organization. And the reason that we have Carolyn joining us, other than she's a friend and she's really awesome, and we knew that she'd be fun to have, is that her newest venture is actually, she's 1 year into writing a graphic novel. She posts it online, I think every 2 weeks you've got an episode, or a chapter, I should say. And this memoir will be written by robots. And so one really interesting piece of this is Carolyn writes the prose, and then she actually uses AI to help her with the corresponding images. So there's a lot of really cool stuff that we're going to be able to talk about today. It feels like there's a lot of very meta kind of stuff going on in your writing of this graphic novel. So Carolyn, we're happy to have you with us.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I guess just to start off with, do you want to just give a little summary of what your graphic novel is about?
As you said, it's pretty meta. I'm using AI to generate these images. The story itself is about AI. The story is supposed to be my imagined memoir from 2028. So it's me in the future living with virtual reality, with AI as sort of these dominant features. And I'm using this as an opportunity to imagine what might be happening to society, to couples, to artists as this technology gets better and better.
I found it really interesting because, like you were saying, it does look at what is it like for a person? What is it like for a couple, like you said? So what is it like having a relationship with all of this happening? And then I kept thinking about things and asking myself different kinds of questions from a psychological perspective. And the interesting thing is, so you have your chapter, but then on your off weeks, you tend to write about the process. And I found that a lot of things I was wondering about, you were actually describing in those in-between sections, which was really cool.
It's interesting. I sort of started that in a way. I wanted to do a chapter every week, but in the beginning, it was just really laborious. The AI just took a really long time. So I started to introduce this idea of bloopers, which also to me was part of the fun because so many of the AI images that came out were so absurd. Like, people with multiple arms, 3 arms, and women with 2 heads, and and some of them were kind of amazing and cool. Some of them were ridiculous. So I started to have an outtakes, like a bloopers reel, which I call Nailed It. And where I would go through and say, like, okay, this was what I was just trying to get 2 women talking to each other. For a long time last year, it was really hard to get 2 people in one image. You could get, I could work, and after a while, I could get one in an image that looked pretty good. But as soon as I tried to add my husband to the scene or whatever, it just kind of blew up everywhere. So I started to do the bloopers, but then, I'm just so fascinated by what's happening with the AI that then I started sort of choosing, this is the story I think is the most interesting, right now, or this is the most interesting to me as a writer, as an artist. So I'm going to share that with you guys. And I kind of summarize it and say sort of what I thought it meant for the larger for the people who don't work in tech, essentially,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of that is like my readers. A lot of them are my friends or they're fans of my other books, and so they're not techies. So I felt like I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to be like the filter for you guys to talk about actually what might affect your daily life.
I
So
really,
Keaton, I don't
oh,
know if I know that.
sorry.
How much of a techie are you? You know me, the techie part of me, I'm married to. So
Um,
Keaton, like, where do you sit with all this?
so very one of the things I really thought was interesting is the main character of your graphic novel is she used to be a teacher. And I happen to also be a teacher that works at a virtual school.
Right.
And yeah, and so I was so fascinated with this because even now, one of the big things that we're constantly trying to talk about is, okay, where does AI fit into
Right.
Mm,
what we
hmm.
do, because it's so prominent, especially it's changing school so much. And so
Right.
a lot of us have to kind of stay on top of what the latest technology is, because I mean, it's very different giving out writing assignments now,
No,
right?
everyone's already
Or
everyone I
book
know teaches
reports.
writing is just talks about, yeah, how everything comes back and it's written by AI and how to
Right,
figure out
Mm.
what is and what isn't. And
right.
I'm glad I'm not teaching writing for grades right now.
It's
That's what I have
tough.
to say.
It is tough, and it's also really funny because there's times that I can tell, like a student will, and it'll be like if I give them a list of short answer questions, and
Mm.
all of them are like 3 paragraph long answers, and I'm like, okay,
Right.
I see what you did there. And
Right.
yeah, and so it's one of those things that's constantly like the field is constantly changing, constantly moving. And this graphic novel really sat well with me because it was one of those things where you're looking at how it's backtracking how we got there. Like one of my favorite chapters so far is the one where you talk about why it's illegal to visit dead people in AI. Like I thought that was so interesting because I feel like that's exactly where we are headed, where it's kind of taking control of everything. I mean, even like now they've changed up the Google chat so you get AI results generated whenever you ask a question on Google
Yeah.
instead of it linking you like it used to. And so, gosh, what a long-winded way to say, yeah, I have to stay on top of
Yeah.
the latest
Absolutely.
technology.
And that's what I'm grateful right now that the writing camps that I'm doing, they're sitting in front of me for 3 hours and they're
Mm.
writing in a notebook, so like
Oh,
there's
you're
no.
making them do it old school. I love it.
Oh, and that's how it's been since the beginning. And they get really, really into it. And it's good because I don't need to read it. Like,
Hmm.
I don't need to read their handwriting, whatever. And I don't care about spelling. It's like, as long as you can read your story and share it with us, that's all that matters. And I don't have to worry that they're on the computer looking up a story about, whatever, a story about a dragon who gets drunk one day. I mean, whatever, like that they can just look that up is such a bummer. But at the same time, here I am using AI myself. So I'm also am trying to figure out how to use it with students. And I advertised a camp this summer for it was an AI graphic novel camp. So I was saying like, okay, if you have kids who love graphic novels, but they don't draw, they don't like to draw, come take my camp and we can do AI graphics just like I'm doing. Not one person signed up.
Interesting.
I had no interest at all. I think, and like my traditional graphic novel class is full, but I think it has to do with the parents. Like the parents are choosing these camps, and I just don't think they get it. And I think that for
Mm.
them, they're like, oh, I want my kid to go be creative. I don't want them to go use AI,
Right.
which I think is a mistake
Yeah,
because it's,
Bill wants our daughter to be able to go to Mars.
yeah. And I think,
Like knowing the technology, understanding the technology, and the art side. I think the balance is
all of
important,
it.
which I think your graphic novel highlights really well.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, part of the graphic novel in general was me exploring that idea myself. I didn't set
Mm.
out with an idea of what the story was going to be and where it was going to go, like for better or worse, like I'm making up as I go along, but it gives me the opportunity to realize what I think, like what
Mm,
do I think about art, and what do I think about, people who create, why do they create? And I think ultimately, for me, the answer is because they have to.
mm,
And so the question going forward is, does it matter if there's no audience for that work? How significant is that to the creative work that you do? Does it take away your satisfaction? Um, I know I will continue to write no matter what, right?
Right.
Because as I said, it helps me understand what I think. But I also like having readers. I like having an audience, and I like that it's a dialogue that goes back and forth. It's a closed circuit. Um, but I know a lot of creative people who paint or play guitar or whatever it is, and it doesn't matter if anyone is watching or listening or praising them. So I don't know. There are really big questions out there right now.
I think that's a really interesting point. So, why do we create and what are the motivations for things? And I was actually just for myself and where I want to go with my passions. I happened upon some things talking about what brings happiness and how do you sustain happiness, and it was talking about what are the motivators. And sometimes too we shift the motivations, and it
Mhm.
actually changes what something means to us. So the act of, for example, getting paid for something, it changes what it means to us. The act of having an audience, it
Hmm.
changes what something means. And it's not necessarily a good or bad thing, but
Right.
it is very important and helpful to know, yeah, why are we doing that? And
Hmm.
I think that's very poignant what you're saying about we have to. I see that for myself a lot where uh, I need to create, I need to innovate, I need to be using those parts of my mind
Hmm.
in order to have satisfaction in life. And I can see that not everyone
Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
Different people work in different ways, and
Yeah.
it's very
And
interesting to
different people
see.
find different things to be creative,
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely.
So, part of the reason I ended up doing this project, I think, so my mom paints, but my father was a computer engineer.
Mm,
He loved technology, right? It always excited him when new things came out. He loved it. And I think that gave me a passion for technology that I'm not afraid of it in ways that I think a lot of other people are. I actually got an Apple Vision Pro. Like I ordered it a year ago,
Oh,
and I
cool.
waited my 6 months. I was so excited, and I went in and I tested it, and it knocked my socks off for
mm.
20 minutes. I was like, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. And then I brought it home, and then it hurt my head. And it hurt my head too much to watch a movie. And also I was sort of like, okay, now what? Like, I don't know how to create
Mm,
with it, right? But all that said, that was a little bit of an aside. My father, as a computer engineer, I always thought what he was doing seemed very, very boring because I just saw him sitting alone in an office on a computer. This is like through the 80s to the 90s. And I was really like, I would never do that. That looks awful. And what do I do now as a novelist? I sit in a room alone with my computer constantly. And I realized, like, as I got older and we talked more, how much we had in common as far as our creative mind and our creative, what is say, like our, I don't know, that we both had a very similar thing about when it was going well and how quickly it would go. Being in the
mm.
flow is what I'm looking for.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
for him, programming was incredibly creative, and he would get in the flow and he would get stuck. And I think it was the same as writing a book for him.
yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, the idea that like people are creative in different ways, and he loved that. And now maybe AI is going to be doing all the programming, and programmers aren't going to get to do that anymore.
It's very, yeah, it's very interesting thinking about the idea of artificial intelligence, because even I think it was a huge part of the recent writer strike. I think there was
Mhm.
something in there about
Mhm.
what AI should be allowed to do and what it shouldn't. And one of the things that's interesting to me is when the AI artwork first started being generated, one of the big issues with it was that in order for artificial intelligence to produce art, it needed to know what art was, right? So it
Exactly.
needed to basically take all of the artwork it had been fed and then use that to generate art. And I think that they were a lot of people were saying like, hey, that's technically like plagiarism because you're using someone else's ideas and artwork. And the first thing it made me think about is how often we do that, right? Like we do
Yeah.
that so often. Like every time I watch a movie, I expect a plot twist because ever since plot
Yeah.
twists were introduced, they've been a staple in film and television and
Yeah.
books, right? They've been a staple, but it started from somewhere. And even with artwork, it's like uh, they're getting it from someone. I feel like it's one of those things where it's very, very rare for someone to just think up something and it's not based on anything they've
Well,
never
they have
seen
this
before.
moment in the first chapter of the graphic novel where this mysterious woman leaves a note on my door, and the note says, "Art is either revolution or plagiarism."
Right. Oh god, I love that.
Right? And it's the
I love
same
that.
exact idea. It's like either you're building on what every single person before you did, or I don't know, you're blowing everything up. But even, Picasso studied classical drawing. I mean, you can go to
Yeah.
the Picasso Museum and see these incredible classical drawing, sketches and paintings that he did. He knew what he was doing before
Right.
he blew it up. Uh and I know when I'm writing, I think, okay, I all the media that I consume, books and film and TV and everything, when I'm writing a novel, it's all in there,
Right.
right? Whether it's the Hemingway or the Jane Austen or, the recent Avengers movie, it doesn't matter, right? It's all in there, and our brains are doing the same thing as the AI, right? We're like scraping our memory. So the question, of course, the big like metaphysical question is, will we want to consume what AI creates? Will there be enough
Mm.
humanity in it that it will be worth reading? I believe it will be worth looking at. I mean, we've already sort of proven that, right? And yes, again, so far there's a prompt in there, right? Someone, uh, I heard this term recently, prompt jockey, which I love. So there's a prompt jockey who's there writing these things, to get the images. And already people are saying like, oh, there's been a book that's been written by AI, or there's been a short story or whatever. But I can say personally, I'm not interested in reading that, which
Mm.
is interesting because here I am making something using AI. But I think the big question is like, why do we read? Why do we look at art? Why do we like the movies? And for me, it's so much about empathy and being able to put ourselves in the position
Mhm.
of somebody else, right? And to experience life in a different way through a different lens. What lens is AI going to offer me that I think is worth experiencing?
Mm.
Right.
I
And
think
I
it's
don't know the answer to that. It might end up being there might be something there, but in general, I read because I think I want to know what the author's experience of life is and
mm.
what they have to say about life. And so, what does something that's not alive have to offer?
That's a good point. Um because one of the things that's really interesting to me is it makes me think about, the same way we can be stuck in like tunnel vision mode or even in like an echo chamber depending on like a political issue or something like that. AI spits out whatever it's fed, right?
Yeah.
And so it's very interesting how even now if you ask AI a question, sometimes it will give you incorrect answers. it'll
Oh,
it'll
yeah.
it won't give you the correct information, and it's because okay, something happened in there where it was not fed accurate information.
It's right.
It's the same way with us. You can retweet anything, whether it's true whether it's false, you can just
And then
share it.
how do you gauge what is accurate information? Because
Right.
And we
everything has
also
perception.
we extrapolate from the information around us,
Mhm.
and that's what I've seen AI do. And Amelia, I don't know if you saw this entry of mine, but I asked Open GPT, what is the graphic novel this memoir will be written by robots about? And it gave me a definitive answer. And it said, it is about Carolyn Cohagan's experience in theater and being a performer. And she's writing about those, I don't know, it was basically like she's writing about the experiences that she's had as an actor. And I was like, that's not right.
That's not true at all.
That's not right at all.
So
And
so
I,
here
it doesn't say it might be about.
right.
Or it
Yes.
could be
It's
about. It says it
definitely
is definitely
about.
about this. And that was really frightening.
So herein lies an issue. And even if it's images, you ask it for images of things, you assume it's going to give you the general mainstream. Okay, here's what we're expecting. But first off, our data that we input into it is already horrifically flawed. I love all of the stuff that you talk about where we need more women. We need more women in AI. We need more women in tech. Did not surprise me when you said when I started telling it to put two women in things, all of a sudden it was getting pornographic and real sketchy.
Yeah.
Yikes.
It
Some
did
of
not
the
surprise.
women are wearing like real, like, they got their boobs out. You're like, what is happening? And that's
And then
color as well. I mean, it's
yes,
just
people
the
of
whole thing.
color,
Same.
age. You were talking about
Oh,
trying to have a 50 something
ages.
and see a visual. The age completely disappeared. I think you were like 25 to 30 and
I think
half of
that
it.
this still happens now. So a lot of things have improved, but even
Oh,
now, because I was working on it today, I either look 20, or if I ask it to make me look slightly older, if I make it to say making me look 50, I look like who's Peter Parker's aunt?
Aunt May.
I look like Aunt May. I have like a gray hair and like an apron, and there's nothing in between.
yeah.
And that's deeply disturbing, right? Because it's
Hmm.
really like, oh, okay, so who is feeding these machines? And you're like, oh, well, white dudes of a certain age, and
Yeah.
that's it.
And they keep doing it too.
They
You'd
keep
think that people would realize diversification is in their best interest. Well, it depends what you mean by their best interest, I suppose. But
exactly.
in terms of creating good product, but you were talking about how certain AI sounded. And the thing is that what we have to be really careful about is what our perception of technology and AI is, because I think there's something about, oh, it came from a machine, it is a technology,
Mhm.
that we then think to ourselves it removes the imperfections of humanity. So hey, if you have a person, doing car mechanical things versus you have a machine doing it, how reliable, dependable, how accurate, all of these things. But machines aren't perfect, and we have to be so careful. And I think one of the big concerns is that the more technology does for us, the less, if AI starts doing the programming for us and we don't know how to do it anymore, do we reduce our ability to see when it's flawed? I think also artists, even psychologists and therapists and others, might over time, part of our role be trying to think about technology in a more human way so that we can.
I've got a scenario for you. I'm really curious to hear. I have, as you can imagine, a good number of conversations about AI with different people because, it's kind of how I end up getting my own ideas, right? To kind of
Mm,
stretch my brain to how far things could go. And I was talking to a friend who's a counselor for addiction, and I was talking to her about virtual reality and the Apple Vision Pro and how incredible it was. And she started talking about what it would be to recreate a patient's traumatic experience
mhm.
in virtual reality. And I was like, whoa, that is so intense. It's intense on so many levels because we don't remember things correctly, especially around
True.
trauma, right?
Yep.
So with any experience that you recreate anyway is already biased and weird. And then the idea that you've like created it and it's out there and like someone else might have access to
That.
it.
privacy is a huge issue.
Oh my God. The idea of like, hey, this traumatic experience really helped John. How about you,
Hmm.
Josephine? Why don't you try the same? Like, it's so messed up. Like all that stuff like really freaks me out. And I know it seems like I'm kind of going leaps and bounds, but I swear I don't think that kind of thing is too far away.
I don't think it is, and I mean, you even in your writing would talk about, I thought I was so far ahead on these things, and then someone told me it's already happening.
Yeah.
So
Can't stay
so
ahead at all.
so okay. VR, virtual reality, it's already been used for a long time when it comes to phobias, in
Mhm.
particular. It's a lot cheaper. Well, especially now. Maybe not. It was still cheaper in some ways back in the day if you had the equipment, but like if you have a fear of flying, how
Yeah.
expensive is it going to be if you have to board a plane every time you want to do exposure therapy, which really is the best thing for it. So virtual reality actually has a really great place in terms of creating these places that bring on a certain anxiety response. In terms of trauma, that's really interesting. So the privacy thing, I think, is an undeniable issue. And actually, when it comes to mental health, I think technology tends to run so far behind in terms of how it's utilized
Mhm.
because it's such a complicated question when it comes to privacy and technology privacy and all that stuff. Um, so, an interesting thing about what you're saying, it it could be helpful. I have to run this by one of my friends who works in trauma a lot. So some trauma treatments they've actually found they used to write a narrative that specifically was writing your trauma narrative so that you could actually break it down more, how you were
Mhm.
thinking, how you were feeling, and processing it through. They found that you didn't need the trauma narrative piece to get a, the same impact out of the trauma treatment. And understandably, some people might not select to do the treatment if they're not wanting to write their
Yeah.
trauma out.
Yeah.
On the flip side, there is so prolonged exposure. You are talking through your trauma memory and you're listening to it over and over again. You're essentially trying to help your body be able to process through the reactions and
Right.
separate out past from present. In some, I'm very much oversimplifying, but one of the helpful things that can happen from replaying and processing through and writing out, talking through in some way a trauma is, you're right that your memory isn't going to be correct. But if you avoid, you get all these snippets that are very
Mhm.
chaotic. And if you can create a more streamlined memory, one, there are less of those extremes because when you put it together, you realize certain extremes you might or assumptions you might have had about
Okay.
yourself or other things might not make sense and helps you in some way. But also just it being less chaotic and more streamlined into a story or a narrative is helpful. So I could see it being useful. I think it would probably be a certain subset of people who would be willing to go through that kind of treatment.
Yeah. Don't you think though that like pop culture has sort of taught us that that's an option? I feel like
Mm,
every movie and TV show has these flashbacks of someone's childhood, right? And it might be the same moment that we see played over and over again, right? And as as you were saying before, Keen, like maybe there's a twist because actually the whole time you thought it was the father that was like abusing someone,
Right.
and no, it was the mother,
uh-huh.
and that opens up everything. But I think that there's something about seeing that sort of possibility on the screen and on TV all the time that makes us open to that idea or makes us think like, well, sure, that's going to be a thing, right? Like, why wouldn't I be able to walk through my memory?
Right. Well,
Yeah.
especially with where we're at now with social media, when with one click you can backtrack
Wow.
Mm,
years and years and
Yeah.
years all the way to
Yeah.
whenever you created your page or even if you
Yeah.
uploaded stuff from before that. And so not only are movies giving us that idea that like, oh, let's trace back, but you also literally have the
You can.
ability to, with
good point.
just the click of a button. And so it's funny because I feel like another thing that social media has done is made us all main characters in
Oh
our
yeah, main
own.
character syndrome. I love.
Yes, it
Yeah.
absolutely just makes us main characters, and the way that we see stuff and visualize things has completely changed. Uh, it- just because everything's got to go through an Instagram filter,
Well,
everything's got to go
you guys are
through,
younger
you
than
know.
me, but for me, like, I grew up in the 70s. There are like maybe 10 pictures of me
Mm.
from 1972 to 1980. It's really not many at all. And there's absolutely no video, right? Maybe it'd be like one picture a year. And, and then more in my teen years or whatever. But for me, the idea of being able to look back and having like videos of me like every day or whatever that my parents took, it actually kind of freaks me out. I can't imagine what it is to look back and be like, hey, there I was at 2, and there I was at 3, and there I am at 5. Like, also the way that it messes with memory, because you're like, do I actually remember that thing? Or is
Uh-huh.
it just because you've showed it to me a bunch of times that I made it a memory? Like,
Which is so a thing.
yeah.
Memory is all sorts of messed up. We like to
Hmm.
think it's some sort of, I was going to say film camera, but I guess that lets people know what I grew up with.
Yeah.
Um, but we think of it as a video, but it's absolutely not. And you're totally right. Uh, all of those sorts of things really do factor into your memory. And so there's that piece, and then not let alone, I was actually thinking about this earlier because my daughter was doing something really cute, and so I was like sneaking a picture, and then I thought to myself, she's going to be so used to just being constantly
Yeah.
recorded in one way or another, and I was like, oh, I don't know how I feel about
I
that.
remember the first time I saw a kid like that had a parent was like taking a picture, like they were in the middle of playing, and then there was this moment of like, Susan, and Susan like stopped and was like, and then right back to playing. And I was like, oh my God, which is super common now. I understand that that's not that's like every kid now is like ready for their close up, right? But yeah, again, that's like foreign to my own childhood
Yeah.
experience.
Yeah.
But then you kind of play into the opposite happening in your graphic novel, which is
Mm.
kind of cool. So you you talk about how, okay, let's say that things get so virtual that you can be anybody, anywhere, anytime. And it to the point where I love that. So Carolyn writes her own husband into this, like real life husband. I'd be really curious how he thinks about things too. But you talk about how you all talk about, hey, should we have sex in real life for once? Or and then it's like, oh wait, but then we'd see each other naked. You know what? Never mind.
Yeah.
Let's stick to the virtual. And so I thought that was interesting too, where I, once again, it is kind of like social media taken to the extreme because, like Keaton, you were talking about, we can look at all these memories and see all these things of the past. There's also, like you're mentioning, all of these filters and all of these unrealistic things out there. And then are we going to get to a point where we could just put someone else's image onto our own or tweak ours virtually in this way that none of us really go by our real selves
Well, there's
anymore?
another scene in there where I go to the train station,
Yes.
and you see me like what I see in the train station before I put on my VR goggles. And of course, right now the VR goggles in the cartoon are all like huge Vision Pros, just to make it clear. But of course, I think it will be glasses very, very
Yeah.
quickly. But the idea is that, yeah, you kind of see all the people on the train station in their sweatpants, with drool on them or whatever. And then she puts on her glasses. I put on my glasses, and suddenly they're all really gorgeous because everyone can be whatever avatar they want as long as people are wearing their VR goggles. And all the information for the train station, like everything is virtual, right? It's sort of like you
Which is
can't even
very realistic
you
for,
can't,
I mean, you have to have a smartphone for so many things these days.
yeah,
Yeah. Well, and it's really interesting too, because even if we're not talking about AI, people have it's funny because I know our season is talking about no capes and like what people are like without their costumes on.
right, right,
It's very interesting how people have completely different versions of themselves online. Online they have that anonymity, they're behind the keyboard, they're behind their phone screen, and so they are a lot more bold, to whether it's for the positive
right.
or unfortunately a lot of times for
Yeah.
the negative with what they're willing to say, and some of the discourse that they have, because just like in your graphic novel, they're behind that avatar, and behind their avatar, they're comfortable. They're like, huh, no one can come at the actual me because
Right.
we're online. I have a VPN.
Yeah.
I could be in Oregon right now. You
Yeah.
don't know. And so I'm going to say the hateful things. I'm going to say the mean
Mhm.
things, the hurtful things,
Yeah. No
because
consequences.
there's no consequences, right? And that's the thing when even talking about the intimacy scene with them, there's a part where it's like, oh, we can be anyone we want to be, and it's like, at what point does that completely take over? And
Yeah.
I
Ready Player
feel
One. Yeah.
right,
Mhm.
right. What point does
And
that completely take over?
and you were hitting on also, if there's no risk, if there aren't any consequences, if there's no tension with unpeeling the layers, then how much are you truly even forming true connections with
I like
people
that because it's
even?
so literal and non-literal when you're talking about like intimacy, and that
Yeah.
scene in the graphic novel is about sex, right? So it's like
Yeah.
you're not taking off anybody's clothes.
Hmm.
You're not smelling their breath, right? You're not like
Right.
Yeah.
all the good and the bad, right?
And the bad, in some ways, helps form some of the
Of
strongest
course.
intimacy ties.
Hmm.
Of course. Um, I read this really fascinating Substack where this woman was talking about influencers who live in Paris because it's the most beautiful city, it's the most photographed city. So all these young women have moved to Paris to try and be influencers, and they live like 6 people to one cruddy little apartment, and they will stage little scenes
Mm,
for the background of their Instagram. They're talking about like, and then, or they go out and obviously they get their coffee and they go and they sit in a beautiful garden and they spend all this time getting the right picture. And then like, they don't have enough money to eat the rest of the day. Like they're,
oh, sad.
it is sad, but I'm saying like, it was crazy. It was this crazy thing of like, and it's such a like a continuing loop. Like the more people that see these
Hmm.
young women living the perfect life in Paris, the more they're like, I'll go to Paris and I'll live that life.
Hmm.
And right. And that just keeps piling on and piling on. And just this vision of all these young girls living in the same apartment, like moving a couch aside so they could come up with one little like perfect table for shot. It just really stuck with me.
Isolation is a mental health killer, and it's such an isolating thing. And then a part of me too, though, is thinking, okay, so let's think robots and AI and where things accelerate there. And one of the arguments is it's not a person. And you even had a point, Carolyn. You were talking about, what do I want out of a story? And I want to hear how that person has lived. Now, arguably, at a certain point, if they're at a certain level of development,
Yeah.
they're probably going to have interesting stories themselves. But also, we tend to personify things.
Oh yeah,
And so
you
I
can't help it.
wonder yeah, we can't help it. And so, um, when it comes to that isolation from each other with the technology, then you add the increasingly uh, independent type of robotics and AI and all of that, and our potential for personifying things. I don't know. It might be enough to bridge the gap.
With AI, Carolyn, you were talking about the blooper reel where you can show, hey, it didn't turn out perfect this first time. It wasn't what I wanted it to be this first time. A lot of people don't do that. A lot of people don't
That's
show
true.
the mess ups. One of the things I always tell my students about social media is you have to remember people normally only post their wins, they never post their losses. I said, so social media is in itself an artificial image
Oh yeah.
because it's not the full version of that person. Most people don't complain about their electric bill online. Most people
Right.
don't complain about how little money they have online. They post pictures of their new outfit, they post pictures of their new shoes, their puppy, they post pictures of a beautiful sunset, right? They're
Yep.
Yes, they're posting all the positive things. And so when you're sitting at home, everything you're seeing is artificial. You're not seeing that person's losses. And so it makes you think, I'm the only one that's in this rut right now
Yeah.
because everyone's got goggles on. It's funny because I know we're talking about AI, but what we see every day on our phones, on our computer when it comes to social media, that in itself is not real. It's like, oh, that person, like, wow, those nachos look really good that they took that picture of. And
Yeah.
that was their fifth picture because they couldn't get the lighting right and they had to move their water out of the
Or
way.
have you
And
seen a bunch
right,
of the food? I have a friend who's a food influencer, and going to one of their things, it's ridiculous. You see them all like hunched over in these like awkward places, and their food probably tastes
Yeah.
terrible by the time they
Which
get to eat
it's
it.
all
right.
cold.
But
Yeah.
you,
Uh,
I mean, and you nailed it. The influencer, an influencer, someone that sways opinion, someone
Mm.
that sways what we would normally think. It's very interesting that they nailed the term so well. Oh, what are you? A social media influencer. People see what I do and they think that's also how I should be.
Well, and you're
The k-
talking to kids. I mean, I think that as adults, we start to know, like, I have enough friends online that I know them personally, and then I
mm.
see what they post, and
Yep.
I see the you know, I see the discrepancy, you know? So
Hmm.
like I can know that like someone is dealing with like, I don't know, their father who has cancer, you know? And then I see a picture of them at the beach in their bikini, like laughing, you know, with a drink. And I'm like, that's weird. Um, and it's only with experience, right? Life experience and knowing more people that you're able to know the people in real life and then know them online. And when you're younger, you just don't have that option, right? You don't know unless you have like maybe you have a parent that posts all the time and you're like, that's not how my dad is, right? Or that's not how my mom is. You start to understand the complexity of it, you know?
Well, I think too, part of it is what's passive and what's active. So there are people out there who I only interact with passively. I only see what they post. I'm not talking to them. I'm not connecting with them versus other people where we have these conversations. And there's even jokes out there online where they talk about, I'm messaging my friend in this one place telling them how terrible life is. And then over here I'm sending them this funny meme. There's all this stuff that talks about these different
yeah.
pieces, but I think part of the problem too is that a lot of these platforms are getting quick, 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 quick. How do you make it quick? How do you make it fast? And how do you make it easy to stay passive? I actually,
Mm,
um,
so
a
interesting.
friend of ours is a YouTuber, and I follow a few different like creative, crafty YouTubers who also happen to sometimes post real life updates
Hmm.
because they're tired of all of
Yeah.
the let's only put certain things out there. And it is really tough, and it's getting harder and harder to maintain a community where you're interacting and you're touching base, and that's how these things started. But I think that's another thing that's making it harder for next generations too, is that it's quicker,
Yeah.
it's easy to stay passive, and if you stay passive, you're not going to get that other information unless, like you said, Carolyn, you just happen to say have a parent where you see those
Yeah.
discrepancies and realize,
Yeah.
oh, everybody must be doing that.
You know, it's interesting because when I started the memoir, I really did want it to be a conversation between me and the audience. Like, I really wanted it to be like other creators chiming in and give me their ideas on, you know, their own professions and where things are going, or are they worried? Are they not worried? And I've been surprised, sort of disappointed with the lack of conversation. And it's exactly what
Mm,
you're saying. It's because I have passive viewers and I purposely my decision to make it visual and to go graphic novel was partly based on people's attention, the number of Substacks everybody's subscribing to, and the ones that I look at. And there's like a New Yorker cartoonist, Liza Donnelly, and I always look at hers, always, because it's cartoons and they're always funny, they're always
mm.
insightful. And I'm like, I'm done in like 40 seconds. It was a good hit. It was really satisfying. So there was part of me that was like, if I tell my story visually and people get that in their mailbox, they will look at it, right? And
Mm.
they do. They open it and they read it, but I don't get that same. conversation, right, that I was hoping for.
Yeah. Yeah. Admittedly, uh, by the way, not, we're here to promote too. Like, hey, Carolyn's graphic novel's great. I agree with you where I was like, oh no, I gotta read a whole year's worth of a graphic novel. How much am I signing myself up for? And it went by super quick. It was really fast. It was entertaining. I strongly recommend. We have
Really
the
makes you
links.
think. I really do
Yeah.
love how much it makes you think, and each issue makes you think in a different way. Like I've been thinking about the Draw Joy chapter.
Mm.
I've been thinking
Mm.
about that one nonstop because it's like, oh, what does joy look like to you? And it reminded me of a conversation I had with my son a couple months back. And we were talking about colors, and I was like, Declan, what color is this? He goes, oh, it's blue. And then he asked me, why is it blue? And I was like, because it's damn.
Like it just is. Yeah. Yeah.
It just is. It's like, how would I that? And so the thing when it said draw joy, I almost thought about like, hey, I thought back to that conversation, like, how do I know this is the color blue? It's because someone else told me. And the character is like immediately thinking of using AI to come up with joy. And it's like, okay, it pulled Joy Behar, which I thought was
Yeah.
really I
Yeah.
thought was really, really funny. And but it also goes to show, like, if you get to this point where everything you do is AI, it's almost like the character is forgetting to use their own emotions to come up with an answer to that. So yeah, I really do love um I really do love this graphic novel. It like I said, I love when it makes you think. And Carolyn, like it's phenomenal how I like I said, it's very different because it's like I'm asking what is going to happen next, but I'm also asking what is it going to make me think about next. And
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love that.
that's not something I normally get when I'm reading a graphic novel. Like, what is it going to make me think about after this? Like, I feel like after every chapter I kind of pause and just sit with it a little bit, and I'm like, damn, all right, what's next? Like, and so it's a very, very fun read. I'm so glad I'm quite invested in it now.
Oh, good. That makes me so happy to hear.
Yeah, yeah, I am too. And admittedly, I'm also in that camp though that has not commented on anything. So I'm part of the problem. And we even complain. Our listeners, they don't comment on our stuff
That's
either.
true. That's
Very
true.
rarely.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's personal messages or someone tells us that a friend told, which is great because it's nice when sometimes if you don't hear it directly, it's like, oh, it wasn't artificial, it was just something natural. But it is nice to be able to connect with the community and even knowing that from personal experience, guilty of it myself. But I think that that's a really helpful thing for us to think about too, is that I think we're just inundated with so many things. And honestly, I have grown scared of comment sections, even though
Yeah.
Hmm.
obviously the
No.
comment section on your graphic novel is very different than
Yeah, but still, no, it's true. Anytime you put anything out there nowadays, right?
Mhm.
There's like for me, like there's like a, like before you hit send or publish, whatever, there's this idea of like, oh my God, like who
Yep.
knows who I'm gonna piss off.
Right.
Yep. I reread it 30 times. I delete it 95% of the time.
Yeah, it's like I've
It's not
stopped.
worth it.
Yeah, I've stopped. I've pretty much stopped commenting on anything on like Instagram or like anything public because I'm like, oh man, you say the wrong thing, it's gonna just you're gonna get so much negative stuff coming at you.
Well, and also at this point, you're a teacher as well. Like
Yeah.
Mm,
it's like, what? Oh, a parent's gonna see something you said and then say, this guy needs to be fired. I mean, the stakes are
Yes.
very, very high.
And what's bad is as a teacher, another thing that I've noticed is that um people will more likely respond when you're wrong about something
yeah.
than if you answer correctly. Like, for example, like if I'm telling my students, I'm asking a student a question, I might not have any students raise their hand in the Zoom to answer.
Yeah.
But if I say the wrong thing, they'll immediately perk
They're
up
all
and be
like,
like,
right here.
actually, I don't think you're right about that. Da, 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 da. And so, but it's the same way on social media. It's like people will dunk all over someone for being wrong, but they won't. If someone's simply
Yeah.
asking for help, they'll comment more on someone's wrong answer to that than they
Yeah.
will just answering a person's question.
Yeah. You know what you should do, Keaton, is you should tell them that you're gonna say 5 things wrong during class.
Ooh, that's good.
Or not even tell them. And then at the end be like, I said 5 things wrong. Do you know what they were?
That's good.
Just use it. Use it
Yeah.
to your advantage.
Also, I feel like it's such a good lesson, actually, even as far
Yeah.
as like AI goes, right? It's such a nice metaphor to be like, you took it as fact, didn't you? Right? Like,
And
check
that's a
the facts.
yeah, and that's another lesson. When I was in a brick and mortar school, I would always do the same thing. I go in the first day, I'm like, all right, take out your notebooks, listen up. And I just start talking and writing and doing all this stuff. Doing all this stuff. And I'm like, all right, y'all understanding that? And then I tell them to put their pens and pencils down. And I'm like, all right, listen, nothing I just told you is correct.
Wow.
Nothing I
Yeah.
just told
Keaton's
you
a
is
good teacher.
correct. Because the thing is, at the end of the day, if you don't leave my class knowing what photosynthesis is, that's one thing. But I would like you more to know how to think and look up stuff for yourself and
Mhm.
find information for yourself than just trust me or trust 100% what your parents say or trust 100% what this one news source says. I want you to be able to look around at all kinds of things, because just like in your graphic novel, things can be artificial, right? But it comes from real sources. It comes from real sources. Even if it's artificial, it still came from something. And we're talking about artificial artwork, we're talking about artificial intelligence, but in reality, we've been there.
Mhm.
We've been there, whether it is biased news sources, whether it's what food looks like in a television
Right.
commercial.
Social media, yeah.
We've been looking at things artificially, right? The only difference is now we're the ones feeding the prompts instead of an
Yeah.
executive board, right?
Was going to say with the writing that, so I taught critical analysis at USC
Oh,
in like
cool.
2011. And at the time, they weren't allowed to use Wikipedia, right?
Mm.
It's like that is not an accepted source because it's group sourced, right? And you cannot write a research paper and, and cite Wikipedia. And so it's crazy to me now that like Wikipedia is so much more reliable
Hmm.
than AI or social media, right? That has now become like a sane place for, fairly reliable information. And even at the time that I was teaching, I would use it, but I
Yep.
I also wasn't turning in a research paper
Right.
trying to prove facts. So yeah, that's a crazy thing to me that Wikipedia is now so kind of like calm in comparison.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because they Wikipedia is even grown to be like, okay, if you're going to put this in the article, we're going to require that you cite your source,
Yeah.
Mm,
right? Where
mhm,
did you
mhm.
pull this information from, so that we can backtrack? And so one of the things I also tell my students, I'm like, it's fine to use Wikipedia, but don't cite Wikipedia as the source. Go to
Right.
where you
Exactly.
Yeah.
pulled
Yeah.
that
Follow those
information,
rules. Yep.
right? Go to where
And
you
so
pulled
that's
that
the
information.
thing. So like Google, because now you Google something and it's your AI prompt at the top. Same sort of thing. Okay, so what are the articles underneath that came from? And how do I delineate that out? And I mean, we're all gonna take the easy way out. We're gonna want something that organizes the information for us. That's not a problem as long as you can backtrack and check and also know where the fallacies are, know where the shortcomings are. It should not surprise anybody. It should not be a shock that if a specific demographic or a limited demographic of people are overseeing a lot of the data input or the development of technology, et cetera, there are going to be huge blinders and blind spots that we have to overcome. And I mean, you even see it too, like medically. I mean, there are certain tests that don't work well on everybody, and we had no idea. Who knew you needed to test things on different varieties of people, or technology that doesn't work as well for people? Carolyn, maybe you know. I couldn't. Speaking of sources, I was trying to figure out a source to confirm this, but there is a rumor that Alexa and all of them don't hear women as well as they do men.
I've heard that too. Yeah, that it has to do with it's like a decibel thing, right? Of like the
Probably.
timbre of our voice. But I agree. I mean, that basically
That's
like
horrible.
what
She
else bullshit?
misunderstands women more.
And
Not to mention that they're usually women, but
my mom at one point, like she went deaf in one ear, or she was going deaf in one ear, and the ear doctor, dude, said to her like, "Oh well, the good news is it's just the high registers." And my mom was like, "You mean every one of my female friends that sits around me and talks to me all day?" Like, it was
yeah,
insane that he was sort of like,
yeah.
"Oh, it's just the women. It's just the female voices. You're fine."
Vicky,
God,
it's
Yikes.
doing you a favor.
Jesus Christ. Oh my
right?
God. Ugh.
Yeah, good times. Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I love seeing that things are diversifying. It's still an issue everywhere, but things are getting better. But once again, I mean, I think one of the biggest lessons we have to keep in mind, and to give him his props, Bill, our behind the scenes
Mhm.
guy, has really helped me with, one of the things we just need to be mindful about is this stuff is not perfect. And just because we create machines, it's still being created by humans.
Hmm.
How how does that impact things? And then how we use it from there too. There's always going to be the
I think there's
human
going to be a
impact.
new movement. Honestly, I think it's almost going to be like a crafts movement. I think that there's going to be a
Mm,
new emphasis on things that are very obviously handmade.
interesting.
Right, that's why I think art will go, like the visual arts. It's really gonna be like, I wanna see the artist brush, I wanna see the brush marks. I wanna see your individual style. I want, you know, my husband, he works with wood and he like carves spoons because he finds it relaxing. But like, that's what I mean. Like a carved spoon that
Yeah.
you can see the knife marks. Um, and I also, I mean, this is me really being optimistic here, going out on a limb, but I think that because of this whole thing that the AI makes everybody look exactly the same and look very beautiful in the same way, and we're talking about Instagram and the influencers and everything else, I'm assuming that there's got to be some shift to a more unusual beauty that
You're going to want to stand out.
you're going to want to stand out. It's going to be good to have an uneven face,
Mm,
right? To have like the one eye that's a little higher, and um, that there's got to be a tipping point, right?
interesting.
With the art, with the social media, with the surgery or whatever, where I just figure there has to be some point where it's going to be like, no, I want to see flesh, and I want to see a real
Yeah.
person, and I want them to be different than anybody I've seen before.
It's kind of like how with the changing of the times, like if you went back to the 1920s and said, show me a picture of someone handsome and someone beautiful, it would look very
Mm,
different from what we would think of
Yeah.
today, right? And yeah, that's a really good point. And I do feel like there's already a huge shift, especially with younger generations, where they're getting to this point where a lot of them are turning away from social media in that sense of there I feel like it's still very much a small movement, but I do think that some of the younger generations are starting to see like, this is all facade. This isn't this
Well,
this
you have
might
to be
not be
really
my thing.
self-aware, right? To say
Yeah.
like, this makes me feel like dirt.
Yeah.
mm-hmm.
I cannot imagine being a child growing up with Facebook and Instagram. Like I'm so glad that was not something that hit until, and this ages me a little bit, but it didn't hit until I was in college.
The ridiculous or callous things that we say and do because we're literally trying to learn and develop and grow into who we're going to be.
Yes.
It's we all need that right and that privilege and that ability to do that without it constantly being a target on our backs.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
But
Absolutely. it's phenomenal how much the world has changed and shifted. And it's funny talking to my students about it because they're just, it'll be funny things. They're just like, what are yellow pages? What are you talking about? What is a,
Oh,
yeah,
ouch.
yeah. It's funny. I heard like a Three Doors Down song on the classic rock station the other day. And I was just like, okay, that's where we're
Place
at
where I
now.
get my haircut, they have this station that's like, it's basically music versions of like every popular song from the last 30 years, but it's got hip hop and it's got punk, like it's got like sex. It's, and I listened to it the whole time. I'm just like, we used to joke when I was a kid about hip hop becoming, elevator music one day. And I was like, and the day is now.
We're here.
There you go.
Here
Here
it
we
is.
are.
Here it is. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Carolyn, it's been wonderful having you. Thank you so much for coming and chatting with us. This is super interesting stuff. Outside of our usual wheelhouse, but it was a really fun adventure. And once again, really love your graphic novel. For people who are listening, hopefully you are interested. There is a link that we have, whether you are going from Spotify or one of our podcast areas or from YouTube. But Carolyn, anything else that you want to make sure people know about?
Oh golly. I'm like, I think mostly it's what we've already said, that I'm excited for people to subscribe and I'm excited for them to comment. Like I'm excited for the conversation. And if you are listening to this and you're like, oh, here's where I think AI is gonna go, I want to hear it. That's the conversation I'm interested in having.
Well, thank you so much, Carolyn.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks for nerding out with us. I'm clinical psychologist Dr. Amelia Brown.
And I'm educator and comic aficionado Keaton Hopkins. Check out my TV and movie reviews on YouTube at Team JVS. Check out our website at bat-therapy.com, our Bat Therapy YouTube channel, and follow us on social media. And don't forget our Patreon page at patreon.com/battherapy. See you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel.